Hello, and welcome to 10 Very Big Books, a Malazan read-through podcast. I'm Peter Bond, and I've read each book in the main series. However, my friends are reading the series for the first time. With me today is my friend and closest confidant, India Jones.
Hello.
And rounding out the podcast is Joshua, the Dream Snaker Baker.
It's my snake
What?
sound. I have a sore throat. I can't do it that bad.
Nope. Alrighty, so a few weeks back, we reached out to Steven Erikson and asked him if he wanted to be on the show. And then, much to our surprise, he agreed and mortifyingly listened to the show as well, which was something, yeah.
He gave me some of my favorite compliments.
Yes.
That's all to say, today we actually just finished recording a conversation with him, and that's what the episode's going to be today. So it was a lot of fun, and we are really excited to have him on the podcast. So,
without further ado, here's your boy Steve.
Here it is.
See you soon.
All right. Apparently, you guys have questions.
We do.
I can't believe it. But anyways, go ahead.
Let's get into it. So, you've had a few different series of books, Willful Child, and then Carcanus, and now this the God is Not Willing series. And I was curious about what lessons you took away from writing Gardens of the Moon about how you wanted to approach writing the first entry in a series of books.
Oh, I don't even think I've ever heard that question. What lessons did I take? It's hard for me to pin that down because Gardens of the Moon took 8 years to find a publisher. Yeah. So there's 8 years between it and the writing of Deadhouse Gates. And so I think my writing had matured a fair bit in between the two. And I think now if I sat down to write Gardens of the Moon, it might come out a little bit different in some respects.
And what type of differences?
That's a good question. I mean, I might hold people's hands a little bit more rather than dangling them over the fire. I don't know. The thing was, I basically have learned all my schooling in writing was as a short story writer. So when I sat down to write novels, I simply extended the short story writing style into novel length. And of course, the thing with short stories is that every sentence, almost, and certainly every paragraph, has to carry more weight than it normally would in a novel. So suddenly in Gardens of the Moon, you're being handed a novel that is actually written like a short story, where everything is carrying more weight than appears. Secondly, I came through the Iowa Writers Workshop, and so that's very much kind of teaching a style of writing which is not found often in fantasy, and that is basically sort of Stephen King's rule of he said, she said. You're not projecting a lot of description to how things are said. And it's all show, don't tell. And so there's very little exposition. So you're being dropped into a story, and how the characters are behaving is telling you more things than appears on the surface. So I think these days when I sit down to write, I'm a bit more aware of that. And I take my time a little bit more. I don't want to drag people through it as fast as I did with Gardens of the Moon. And secondly, I mean, India, you'd read Hunger Games, and that was it, right? And
I wouldn't even really count
fantasy.
that. Yeah,
no, it's not epic fantasy, and
it's not even no.
No, and of course, one of the things Gardens of the Moon was me setting up all of the tropes of epic fantasy and then pissing all over them. So I was basically undermining all of those tropes. But if you're unaware of the tropes, then you're not aware of what I'm up to, right?
Definitely.
And so that makes it an even steeper learning curve. So I'm very impressed that you're staying with it. I'm surprised you're not like actually chained in the basement somewhere and sort of being force fed these books. But
that's practically what happens. I won't lie.
I thought as much. Are you going to stay with it?
I think I'm in it for the long haul at this point. Now I am more curious now, and now that I've read the first one, the second one is definitely, and I think everyone says this, or at least that's what Peter explained to me. Like, okay, once you get through the first one, if you can do that, then you can get through the rest. So
I kind of roll up my sleeves and get to work with the second one. Because it was like I got external validation by getting the book deal for the first one, and then it did well, and so suddenly I was given permission to write the novels I wanted to write in fantasy. And so Deadhouse Gates is very much one of those. But here's the other thing to bear in mind, especially it's important to be, I think, reading the text as opposed to just listening. And there are scenes that you've already come to, even in the beginning of, Gardens of the Moon, but especially now in Deadhouse Gates, that are going to resonate and come back in book 8 or book 9 or book 10. And so if you think of the scene you guys just recently spoke about where Culp, Hibork, Felicin, I can't remember who else, Gessler, Stormy and Truth all end up on this boat in this other warren, and it's peopled by headless corpses manning the oars, and there's a guy pinned to his chair by a spear in the captain's cabin. Well, I don't just throw that in there for interest's sake.
It wasn't for laughs.
No, we're going to revisit it, and we're going to revisit it from at least 2 different angles. One in the 4th book, I think, and one in the 6th. Yeah. And so it's always, if you see me creating something like that, I don't just leave it there. It's going to come back. It's going to be important later, or we're going to see it from another angle. So the only thing I could promise you, India, is that there is a payoff at the end of all of this.
It all comes
stay
together.
With it. It comes together. Yeah.
I think. No, I was just gonna say that for me is, I think that's the hardest part, is not understanding where it's going, and in a way though that I think that people who do read fantasy kind of, or maybe even not, I can't even fathom. Most of the time when I'm reading, I'm just reading, and I'm just, everything's happening, and then something else. But Peter and Josh are always able to be like, oh well, yeah, you remember in the last book when this happened, and I'm trying to get to that level of understanding. That's the dream so far. But
and of course the other thing is, having kicked at all the tropes of epic fantasy in the first book, I couldn't just repeat that process for the next 8 books, 9 books. So, and not only that, taking the piss out of those tropes is an easy thing to do, but coming up with something new in the place of those tropes, is a more difficult thing to do. So that's what I set out to do. So it's not going to follow your traditional epic fantasy narrative at all. And you're going to find that out very soon, because you'll be going to Memories of Ice, the 3rd book, which takes you back and picks up after the events in Gardens of the Moon. 4th book is going to leapfrog, and it's going to partially, eventually end up back in 7 cities. 5th book is set in a completely different setting. So each one is going to be feeling like a standalone novel, but they're all connected, I promise.
And I actually think the connections and the payoff to talk about, that scene in Deadhouse Gates that comes back in 4 and 6, it always strikes me as it is really rewarding when it pays off, and it always really strikes me as, I'm almost blown away by the audacity of it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, man, I can't believe the con has been going on this long. I especially felt that really near the end of the series. It's just like, wow, I've been being played the whole time. It's like just slipping in right under the radar, so to speak.
I was kind of forced to do that. And the reason, this is going to sound ridiculous, but when my editor first, gave me his edited version of the manuscript of Gardens of the Moon, and later Deadhouse Gates and Memories of Ice, especially the second 2, he was always concerned about length, because book publishers hate long books. Yeah. And he would always sort of point out sections to say, well, can we cut that? And I'd say, well, no, that comes back in book 8, or that comes back in book 9. And then, of course, I realized I couldn't be lying to him, so I had to make sure it came back in book 8 or book 9. Yeah. And that was kind of...
You had made a commitment in some way.
I had made a commitment, yeah. And so just on the basis of my, I guess, own integrity, I wanted to make sure that happened. So once I set those things up, I kept them in mind, and I knew I was going to swing around and we're going to revisit these things.
That is impressive memory.
Well, I don't know if I could do it now. I'll tell you that. Next question.
Yeah, so my question for you is, so someone today, I was getting my hair cut, and I was explaining the books to my barber, and he was like, well, why is it impossible to read? And I was like, well, imagine you're given the first Harry Potter book, and the book is about Ron, Harry, and Hermione, and they're 38. And every 4 sentences, someone's like, remember when you killed the Dark Lord? And you don't get to see any of it, and it's just stuff they're doing now. But also you have to know about all the things that they did to kill Voldemort, or you won't understand the book. And what inspired you to hurt me like this? Like, what went into that decision to focus so highly on a group that has this big established history that you purposely hide from the reader for, I assume, a long part of the series?
Yeah. Don't forget, the Malazan world was initially gamed. Okay, so it was AD&D to begin with, and then we switched to GURPS, Steve Jackson's generic universal role-playing system. And all of our gaming basically provided the foundation, the backstory, if you will, for the novels. There are some elements of the novels that were gamed, but there was a lot that led up to them that did not show up in the books. And so I wanted us as a reader to be dropped into a story. And I wanted the characters to have history. I didn't want them to be farm boys who were suddenly roped into, the grand adventure. I wanted these people to have history. And some of that history was going to be relevant, and certainly relevant for the characterizations, but relevant also for the larger story, because it's basically a kind of fictitious history that I'm writing. And so because it's a history, all history is built on hidden foundations beneath the surface of where you're walking. So that needed to play a role in all of this. And then I was going to reveal only what I felt you needed to know for those moments, and then just build from there. I have to say, I've really been entertained by you guys doing this podcast. I've listened to all of them, and they've been a lot of fun. They've been a lot of fun.
Thanks a lot.
I'm sorry for
no, it's
I've
great.
said.
It's great. In India, you have a very infectious laugh, so that helps too.
Thanks. They keep me laughing.
No, that's good.
How much of playing with the character's history do you think is maybe a microcosm of maybe larger ways you're kind of prodding and talking about history in the series as a whole? Because I feel like reflecting on history and the way it's shaped by historians and in the consciousness is definitely a part of it.
Yeah.
So do you think the character's history is reflecting that?
Some of them. How technical do you want me to get here? There's a strong metafictional element to the entire series.
Yeah.
And it can be also described as both postmodernist and post-structural. So yeah, you're looking triumphant. Why is that?
Well, I had a question about postmodernism, and I received a real shellacking from
I've been yelling at him for 6 straight days about
So it's a great day.
Yeah, no, and the cipher for that is entirely the 8th novel, Told the Hounds. Yeah. But when you get there, that is the cipher. That's basically telling you how the story has been told up to this point and how it will be told following. And so yes, it is. I mean, I came out of that sort of postmodernist kind of approach to literature, anyways. So, a real life does not have a novel narrative structure. It does not have that. I mean, it has a beginning. And there may be climactic elements in one's life, but you don't recognize them until after you've gone through them, and then you die, and so it shuts itself off very quickly. And that kind of narrative is not satisfying to somebody being told a story. So the story actually has to be more important. And in that sense, everything that's in there is serving that dual purpose, and not only sort of entertaining and driving along a narrative, but in appeasing the desire of the reader and the audience to have a story told to them. And there has to be an emotional investment as well at the same time. So, and that's why Told the Hounds is basically telling you exactly what's going on in terms of where this story is coming from. I flip it in book 10, but that's okay. By then, everybody's either bought in or they're dead. So,
yeah. When you have a character like Kruppa introduced,
Krupp.
This is the question. Yeah. This is the question.
Krupp. Just Krupp.
When you have a character like him, who especially in Told the Hounds later grows into talking about these metafictional elements and kind of postmodern aspects of it, but when he starts in Garden of the Moon, how much of him maybe growing into that was that in mind, or were you kind of just having fun with him as a character?
Well, I knew Told the Hounds would be told from his point of view. I knew that early on. But yes, he certainly evolved. And he went through a fair bit in Memories of Ice.
His eyes grew wide when you said that it was told from him.
Should I take my headphones off?
No, you're good. Please continue.
Yeah, sorry about that. I can't remember if you were the one hating Krupp or not, or India.
It's a mutual
I think
dislike.
I liked him toward the end, I think.
Universal Krupp love, in my mind.
So, I was reading online when I was trying to figure out what I could possibly ask you, and I saw that the poems in the first book are supposed to, like, tell what's going to happen in the chapter. Is that true?
Sometimes, yep.
So,
most people skip them. That's the problem.
Oh, I didn't skip them. I just didn't understand them. So.
I will say, India, I read them really closely every time, and I always know there's something I should get out of it, and I've yet to get it out of it. And
You probably are, but not entirely on the surface. Sometimes the poems reflect the subtext of the story and the themes of the story. And quite often I use the metaphors to comment directly on the themes, because I'm not going to be commenting directly on the themes within the narrative. So I use the poetry to do that.
Oh.
Now, do you write the poem first, or do you write the chapter first?
I write the poems first.
Really?
I write them first.
Whoa.
No way!
Yeah.
That's
because
awesome.
it's the equivalent of me putting notes up on my wall or around my laptop saying these are the themes of this chapter. It's that equivalent.
Yeah. Except way cooler because it's a poem.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, definitely.
But when you're writing the poem, do you have an idea of what's going to happen in the chapter? Like, oh, Philistine's going to go do this or that, or are you just, you're really more channeling the ideas and themes of it, and then maybe those types of character plot stuff is coming later.
I leave a lot open to spontaneous invention. Generally, when I'm writing notes for these books, my notes consist of the chapters with the characters listed who are going to appear in that chapter. And that's almost it. And I know where everything's heading, but I allow myself to have as much freedom as possible for spontaneous invention as to how they get there.
Yeah.
Jumping in real quick, actually, something I've been curious about, speaking of kind of having a plan. So when you started writing Gardens, and maybe even before, did you know the overarching tale you were going to tell? Or did you, you must have had some idea because Gardens has so much laced in it that obviously is going to be revisited, but did you know everything? Do you feel like it was 80%? Like, where were you at that point of your life?
I knew where I was going to end up, and it was simply a question of getting there. And then I knew that there were going to be three major, I guess, geographical settings that were going to converge into one. And then I knew I had one character whom you've met in Gardens of the Moon very briefly, that being Tavor, who was going to be the central spine of the entire series. But I had to really keep her reined in, and I kept her reined in pretty much until the last 50 pages of the 10th book. So she's going to be playing a fairly major role in the story to come, and I knew that was going to be the case. And then I had certain scenes that were in my head for 18 years, damn near, and I just had to write my way to get there and not rush. And I didn't rush because it's like 3 million plus words.
Yeah,
the world's longest short story.
I think it's funny you say that because I like revisiting Gardens of the Moon this time. That scene with when Ganois comes back to his house and his sisters are there.
Ganos Paran, yes.
To see the three of them there is kind of a moment, and it's imbued with more weight in that moment than it obviously did the first time I visited. So it was really kind of interesting to come back to a second time.
And that's why rereads are rare, are where the major rewards I think are going to come. It's by revisiting these things. I know you guys are dumping all over Felicin right now. Poor Felicin.
Hey, I'm trying to stick up for her.
Always.
I will have no regrets until eventually I will super regret what I've said. But until
no,
then,
you don't
I'm
have to
living my
regret
life.
what you said. It's basically she is a character who almost forces a judgment upon the reader, and you can judge her harshly or you can judge her with compassion. Which is not saying you're forgiving of her actions, because some of them are unforgivable. But the context of her experience, I had to stay as true to that as possible. And it wasn't going to be pretty. And of course, where she is headed is something you'll find out, obviously. But she was one of my favorite characters to write. So I don't know what that says about me.
Well, she's one of my favorite characters to read, so
Me
I don't know what
too.
it says about me too.
But
I would call her divisive.
Well, and she's hurting, right? And, and anyone who's hurting to that extent will lash out. I mean, that's what they do. Yeah.
Now,
there's
go ahead.
There's such a diverse
we're too
set
polite. You go. I'm gonna go. So you say that it really comes through with the rereads. You understand that if people reread the series, you've locked them into like years of their lives or rereading these same 10 books. Do you? How many rereads do you think it would take someone to get everything out of this series, or is that an impossible question?
I don't know. You would not believe how many fans have contacted me to tell me they're on their 7th reread, or their 8th, or their 10th, and they're still getting new things out of it. So I don't know. It depends how carefully one reads, I guess. It depends where you are in your life as to what you pick up on. What is important to you in a scene. That will change. It changes over time. So, you may start, thinking, oh, I'm going into an epic fantasy series and I want to see lots of battles and sword swinging and magic and dragons and all the rest. And you'll get it. You'll get all that stuff. But then you read through it the second time and you know all that's coming. So you're actually paying attention to other things. And quite often that will be, what are the characters up to? What are they feeling? What is their arc? What aspect of the role of the hero's quest are they representing? So all of these other things will come into play, and then a lot of the short foreshadowing is fairly. I don't hammer the foreshadowing. It's a very light tap, just very light, and so then they may pick up on those things second, third time through.
I think it's a really interesting idea to know that, I read this series now and I'm younger now. And then the idea that 30 years from now, I will also I'll read Midnight Tides again and you'll bring a totally different set of experience to it.
I think so. I think all readers do.
About revisiting.
Yeah, all readers do. And quite often, we go back to the books that caught our eye or caught our hearts in our adolescence. And in revisiting those things, we'll go, really? At the same time, we're searching for a kind of nostalgic feeling when we go back to reread these things. So there's a comfort that is offered by the familiarity of returning, say, to the Malazan world 10 years from now.
Yeah.
So all of that plays a role, I think, because it's certainly stuff I've experienced. I go back and read books that I read when I was, 11 or 12, and sometimes you wince. I mean, the writing can be, leave something to be desired. But I'm always prepared to the child I was who read that back then, and to respect the fact that because I read that is what has brought me to where I am now. And I'm hoping that will be the case for many people who read the Malazan series.
Well, what are some books you've revisited recently?
That's a good question. Believe it or not, I have a number of times revisited Edgar Rice Burroughs because that's what I grew up with. I don't know if you can see in the background here, but
it's a big collection.
There are books.
Yeah, there are books behind that jungle, which I have to use a machete to get to my books. But and those are the ones that I first discovered. They were the first works of fiction that I actually got into, and I got into them not because of the content, but because of the covers. Frank Frazetta illustrations on the covers that just blew my mind. And Frazetta was doing the Ace editions of Burroughs and Robert E. Howard, the Lancer editions of Conan. And so those ones catch my eye. I just recently tried to start up reading a particular Conan short story because I'll be writing an essay on Robert E. Howard for somebody else right now. And I couldn't do it. It was very difficult. Wow. So I could see all the bones of what he was doing very, very quickly. Whereas, say, something like, I have a first edition of Tarzan of the Apes, and I do go back to that on occasion. There's a lot of naivety in the approach that Burroughs took for that novel. I mean, he knew nothing about Africa. He knew nothing about, and there's a lot of implicit racism, and there's a lot of, rather dubious aspects to it. But there were 24 books in the series, and by the end of it, he had made his own journey, and it was far less offensive, I think, towards the end of the series. But structurally, that first novel, Tarzan of the Apes, is a brilliant masterwork. It is brilliantly put together. The voice is extremely sure, very confident, and he had no sense that it was rushed. Whereas, some of those books, say book 18 or 19 in that series, he mailed it in. He was picking up the paycheck to write another Tarzan book, and it showed. But the first novel, actually, and the two that follow, is basically one big novel, are surprisingly good, even to this day.
Somewhat related. I don't know if you've ever answered this in an interview before, but if you had to pick like the quintessential, and this is a tough one, the quintessential like fantasy book, doesn't even have to be for like it being groundbreaking, but the book that you think to understand fantasy one should read.
Well, I would say for an adult, and I make that distinction because The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings is the one series that can kind of bridge childhood and adulthood. I would say for modern fantasy, it would be Stephen R. Donaldson's Lord Fowl's Bane. That one actually is a conscious dialogue with Lord of the Rings from an adult perspective. And
I just borrowed it the other day.
Did you?
You like the book?
Yeah, and it drags the fantasy fan into adulthood, out of the world of Tolkien. And I would say that one for me was just jaw-dropping. The whole first two chapters I've gone back to reread because they are so unexpected, and Donaldson takes so many risks and gets away with them. That one I think really set the stage for a lot of fantasy. Now, at the same time, a lot of epic fantasy decided to ignore that and went back to rewriting Tolkien. And so you'll find those ones out there, and they're popular. But yeah, that's a good question.
Thank you. I mean, I'm very hyped. I'm going to go to a bookstore to find this now if I can.
The style is very Latinate, so it takes a while to get into, and you may need a dictionary at hand. I know I did.
I got that.
I'm out.
I have to tell you, I was surprised to find a paperback copy here in northern Japan. So it was quite.
Yeah, wait, actually,
that's
awesome.
Intense. That's
my
fantastic.
eyes popped up when I saw it.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And that's the first one, right? Lord Fowl's Bane? Yeah.
So, obviously, this is a podcast about a book, so we're obviously going to be talking about books. But beyond that, like, what are some of your other passions and hobbies? Like, I don't know. What do you find the most, I guess, joy out of doing? Maybe it is writing, maybe it's reading, but...
This is, actually, the most joy that I still experience when I'm not doing writing is to walk a forest, a field, a riverbank, anything related to archaeology. And so when I'm walking there, I'm not looking at the leaves and the flowers. I'm looking at the ground, looking for artifacts. And I'll do that to my dying day. And I still involve myself in archaeology when I can. And to me, it manifests in the series that you're reading, because I did a lot of work as a surveyor. So my job was an archaeological surveyor. So my job was to go out and find sites. And in order to do that, you have to look at the environment and then peel it back in time to see how it's changed. And then you rely upon the continuity of the human condition. And you think, well, where would I camp in this peeled back environment? And I go there and I stick a shovel in the ground, and sure enough, I find artifacts. So that's what I did. And it's what I do to this day. The last stuff I've worked was in southern Italy, and it's a site called Fornello, which you can actually volunteer on. Messrs is MESSORS is the program, and it gets a lot of Americans and Canadians who go there for 2 weeks in Puglia, southern Italy. And the site you're working on are a series of limestone caves that had been at one point Byzantine era, I guess, converted into churches. And so they have frescoes on the walls that need to be restored and repaired. And then 20 meters away from the cave mouth, there is a stretch of flat land that was a Greek colony. And prior to that, a Neolithic village. And it's plowed ground, and you can find, pottery, Greek pottery, black on red, red on black. So stuff from the 5th century BC, 6th century BC. and it's just all lying around. And put me in a site like that, and I'll be there for days. I'll walk that site, and that's the stuff I love doing.
What do you think it is about seeing those types of sites and artifacts that excite you? You know,
I lived in England for a while, and it was quite a revelation to be walking the landscape there, to realize that everything I saw had been shaped by human activity in some fashion or another. That entire landscape. Whereas, say, in Canada, where I did most of my archaeology, you scrape through the first 6 inches of soil, and you left human history behind. So there, it's natural geological forces that have shaped this country and America, and the human presence probably at best will go back up here 10,000 years, down in the States maybe 30,000, maybe 40,000. But southern England, you're looking at 1.5 million years of human activity, and that part really gets me going. I know I was on a book tour for the French editions last year in November. It was a month-long book tour. We went through 12 cities in France, and then I ended up in Paris, just outside Paris. And they put me up in a room in a building that was 17th century. I think it was a converted monastery of some form, or nunnery. And I was standing out in the backyard, which had a fountain and a whole bunch of planted trees, and was kind of facing a cliff, and just out there having a cigarette. And I looked down around the trees. There was this earth, ground, everything else was paved, but around the trees you had this sort of 10-foot circumference or 10-foot diameter circle of broken earth. And I started noticing flint artifacts. And so I started collecting the flint artifacts, and I found one particular artifact, which was what's called a Levallois core. And it's a flint core, which is a very specific style of taking flakes off the core in order to make tools from the flakes. But it's a very specific style, and that style is Neanderthal. So there I was standing in the back of this 17th century monastery, and in the ground were things that were at least 250,000 years old that had been handled by humans.
Whoa.
And then one of them was what's called a thumbnail scraper. And the scrapers, of course, are tools used by women and made by women. So I knew I was holding in my hand something that had been handled by a Neanderthal woman maybe 250,000 years ago. And it's just so cool. That's the thing that gets me going.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Now, you obviously have a great love for archaeology, and I actually believe I read you're trained in it. But what was it that inspired you or led you to change your career path to writing fantasy? Was it the money? Was it the babes?
Was it the money?
Which one?
No. Well, mind you, archaeology. When I was working, it was the golden age for archaeology. The funding has all disappeared. It's all dried up. Also, I was kind of chafing at the academic side of things. I preferred the field work, and I continued with field work for close to 20 years. But the academic side of things was starting to really sour on me. So I was in the master's program, and then I went to Belize in Central America and worked on a dig, and then traveled through Central America. And I remember I'd applied for the writing program at the University of Victoria here. And I was in a sweaty phone booth in Belize City talking to my mother, who said a letter had arrived from UVic, University of Victoria. So I had her open it. And in that letter, basically, they were offering me entrance into the creative writing program. And that was it. I just dropped the archaeology right there and then. And it was the best choice I made because it was a brand new writing program, and the instructors were phenomenal. They were excellent. So I learned so much from them.
And how much had you been writing before that acceptance into the program?
Not much. I'd done about 3 short stories. One of them had come in second place at in a small short story contest in Winnipeg. And that was it. But it's something I definitely wanted to do. I thought I was going to be an illustrator. I thought I was going to actually be a comic book artist. That's sort of where my early training was.
Are you good at drawing too?
You draw?
Well, that's what I did. I drew and I painted. I painted oils. Yeah. Well,
there's got to be some this is insane. You do so many things.
Well, early on, my high school actually had a program with the Winnipeg Art Gallery for, I guess, certain students in their art program to take courses at the art gallery, and I got sent to do those. One of the things that slowed me up was comic book illustration at the time was old style. There was no airbrushing. There was no nothing online. There were no computers. So to do a single panel or a single page would take me like 2 weeks. It was ridiculous, and it struck me that it was almost insurmountable to be a comic book artist, at least in Canada at the time. I would have had to gone to New York or somewhere like that. And secondly, because I got all the early training in painting and sketching and life drawing and all the rest, I was burning out very fast.
Okay.
And eventually I saw that there was always an implicit narrative in everything I drew, similar to comic books. So I eventually dropped the drawing and just stuck with the narrative. And that's what led me into writing.
Gotcha. So what are you bad at? What's like the thing that Steven Erikson cannot do?
I can't tap dance worth shit.
Have you tried?
I've been there.
No.
Yeah.
Here's the problem. See, I was also a fencer for close to 40 years. I've only stopped fencing maybe 3 years ago. And one of the things about fencing is it's arrhythmical. So you're about breaking timing. You're not about falling into rhythms and patterns. In fact, a lot of what you do is to read the other person's timing and then counterattack into their timing. So, and I talked to a friend of mine and she's been fencing longer than I have. And she says she can't dance worth shit because all her fencing has trained her to actually break rhythm and break time. Yeah.
That's super interesting.
It's wild, yeah. So that's my excuse, because I can't dance worth shit. Yeah.
I will say, don't worry. Peter and I are literally college musicians, and we can't dance either. So yeah, right. we also
but if you got an instrument, that's fine. You can get away with it, right?
Yeah.
Hey, I tap danced once, and I will not hear you impeach my skill.
Peter, you can't dance. I'm sorry.
Wow.
Whereas my wife is a great dancer. So it's been a point of contention through 30 years of marriage. Yeah.
If that's the biggest point of contention, I think that's pretty great. So.
Well, she might disagree, but anyways.
I have an unrelated question.
Sure.
How did you pick the name Erikson?
It's my mother's maiden name. I originally was publishing as under my own name, Steve London, the contemporary fiction novel in the UK, and then we sold the fantasy novel to a different publisher, and the original publishers came back to my agent and said, "Well, we don't want to confuse the audience, so we'd like Steve to have a pseudonym for his fantasy work." And my mother was a great reader. A reader of virtually any book I bought, she would end up reading. Plus, she loved things like James Bond and Dashiell Hammett and all of the spy thrillers of the time. And so she died before I got published anywhere. So in order to honor her, I chose Erikson. That's her maiden name.
Nice.
That's really nice. That's not at all. That's not at all. I didn't even think there was going to be a story, like a real solid. That's really nice.
Yeah. Well, it is what it is. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Producer AJ interrupting this conversation in the middle of the episode to do my regular thanks and updates. I will keep this quick so we can get back to it. Our first thanks this week obviously goes out to Steve Erikson for coming on the show and for being such a wonderful person to talk with. Thank you also to all of you who reached out and told us he was listening to the show. And can I let you in on a little secret? We knew the whole time. We've been in contact with Steve for a couple of months now, trying to make this episode a reality, and we couldn't be happier with the way it turned out. If you're enjoying the episode, please tell a friend, and if you've told all your friends, why not tell the internet how much you like us by rating us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and leaving a review. We read all of them, and we really appreciate all the positive things you guys have had to say. Okay, just a couple more things and we'll get back to the show, I swear. Thanks to Dan Geserick for making our spectacular logo. You can follow him on Twitter at Dan Geserick for the hottest GMC commercial takes. And of course, the incredible track used in today's episode is by the one and only Amaranthin. The song is Floating Man from their album The New Romantic, which you can find along with their other music on bandcamp.com. Links to their pages will be in the show notes, and 10 Very Big Books will be back on November 22nd with chapters 11 and 12 of Dead House Gates. I will talk to you then, but for now, let's get back to the conversation with Steve Erikson.
George R. R. Martin gets called the American Tolkien all the time. Do you think we should get Canadian Tolkien going for you?
Like that.
No, don't relate me to Tolkien at all, because Tolkien was never my inspiration for fantasy, right?
Yeah.
There's two threads that you come from. One of them is sword and sorcery, and the other is epic fantasy. And epic fantasy, at least in the modern sense of the meaning of that phrase, would be Tolkien, is the one who gave birth to epic fantasy. Modern epic.
Do you feel like his tropes are primarily what you're bouncing off in the work, or
yeah, absolutely, and writing against all the time. In fact, I'm convinced Frodo should have died. Yeah, he should have gone down with the ring.
100%.
And the reason being is actually it's a fictional reason. It's a structural reason. All of Frodo's companions believed him dead, and so we got to witness their grief. If that grief is then held to be false or unrequired, then it takes the emotional impact away. I would rather see and feel that grief that they're feeling, knowing that he had given his life to get rid of the ring. Anyways, I've had that argument on panels. I've offended so many people. You have no idea, but I will say it over and over again that he definitely should have died. But so I came out of the sword and sorcery stream. So it was Robert E. Howard, Fritz Leiber, Karl Edward Wagner, all of these writers, mostly short stories. There's a few novels in there. And that's the stream I came through to get up into fantasy. So don't relate me to Tolkien. Don't compare me to Martin either.
The Canadian someone.
Well, yeah. I mean, George's Game of Thrones came out, I think, maybe 2 years before Gardens of the Moon. But Gardens of the Moon had been written 8 years previous to that.
Yeah, I guess so, right?
And so I know I've seen people comment saying, "Oh, well, Erikson kills off characters because Martin did." Well, no, not really. I planned to kill off plenty of characters long before that. So, and he's writing a fairly Eurocentric style fantasy, and I was writing against that and continue to write against that.
I feel like the two series are compared a lot, but are pretty different in a lot of meaningful ways.
Very different. Yeah. One of the problems with what happens is if you pull across a Eurocentric inspiration for your fantasy world, you can end up dragging some things with it. And some of them are not just tropes, but they're now fantasy cliches, where the barbarians are in the north, the hordes are in the east, the south is full of the decadent peoples and civilizations. All of that is Eurocentric. And then if you're going to write a quasi pseudo medieval kind of culture in that secondary world you created, and you're dragging it from this world, then you're bringing patriarchy with you. And, it sucks because it limits what the female characters can do. And so this Malazan series, the Malazan world, was intended to have no sexism in it. So we created a magic system that was egalitarian. It was something anybody could reach. And if access to power is available to everyone, you cannot have a gender-based hierarchy of power. It cannot come into being at all. And that's why it's the Malazan world has no sexism. It has predation, but predation will always exist. It exists among all species.
Yeah.
And yet, at the same time, we could not signpost it, right? We could not sort of wave the banner around saying this is a world without sexism, because none of the character points of view would think of it in those terms, right? Yeah. They just live it, and they don't question it. It simply is. So, yeah, there's a big difference between what Martin did with Game of Thrones and the Malazan stuff. Huge difference.
You mentioned earlier that the story kind of came about from a tabletop game. Do you still tabletop?
No. I discovered basically it draws from the same creative well. And so if I'm running a game, I'm basically using all of my creative energies to entertain and guide these players. And that's a blast. There's no question about it. But I've got contracts. I've got books I've got to write. So it's one or the other. And I don't get paid to run games.
Well, we've been going for a bit. India, do you have any final questions you wanted to ask?
Well, okay. So I guess not really why, but then also like what was really what made you persistent to keep going, to get it published? That's really what I'm more interested in.
Well, when I wrote it initially and finished it, I sent it off to two major U.S. publishers. I think it was Del Rey and Tor. It went to Tor first, and it sat with Tor for 18 months. And in fact, I'd gotten a note saying we're waiting for one last reader, but we're really, interested in this thing, etc. So I was all hyped. And then the manuscript shows up in the mail, and they turned it down. So then I sent it to Del Rey, which was Stephen Donaldson's publisher, and it took them about 9 months before they sent it back. And bear in mind, you don't send electronically. There was no electronic sending. There was printed out manuscripts. And at that point, I think I was discouraged enough to simply put it on the shelf. And that's where it sat. And so then I wrote, I got 2 degrees in writing and moved to England, carrying that manuscript with me, thinking, well, I do want to be a writer because it's the only thing I felt I was really good at. And I hated working any other kind of job. Apart from archaeology, and there was no archaeology work to be had at the time.
Right.
So we moved to England because my wife's English, and I had a 5-year plan to find an agent. And I'd written a contemporary fiction coming-of-age novel called This River Awakens. And so I was looking for a publisher for that. And we found one. So I had the agent within 3 years. And then it was a question of, well, what am I going to do next? Well, I pulled down Gardens of the Moon off the shelf and dusted it off and revised bits of it. Sitting at a pub in Dorking in Surrey in England. The pub was called The Bush. And I'd go down there with this crappy old Mac laptop, one of the first laptops they ever made. It weighed about 8 pounds. It had to be plugged in. It was a monochrome screen. And I basically revised Gardens of the Moon at that point and fired it off to my agent. And he wasn't expecting that, but he ended up passing it out to a number of US or UK publishers in fantasy. And then Bantam UK was the one that jumped on it. And that editor I am lucky enough to have been with for the entire, almost virtually everything I've written. The same editor. Bantam UK has since been bought out by, I guess it's part of Random House now, which owns virtually everything in publishing. And then it took 3 years one of the rejections we were getting a lot, even when we were being published in the UK, from the American publishers, was that my books were too complicated for the American reader.
Truth.
And too many characters.
Fair point.
You think? Do you think? And I was fairly convinced that wasn't the case. But eventually, we ended up almost twisting Tor's arm to get them to buy into this series. And they did. And to this day, my highest royalty earnings are coming from the States. So I was right. That audience was there.
On your side.
It was there.
We're not that dumb. We can read it.
Not in the least. Not in the least. And so I feel vindicated by that because I knew I was convinced that there was an audience out there for it. And that's probably what kept me going more than anything else. All the way through that was that somewhere out there was an audience for this. And it's just a question of knocking down, getting your foot in the door with an agent and then seeing where it takes you.
That sounds like a lot more, you make it sound a lot less impressive, I feel like, than it actually is to hold out for, like, to just believe in yourself that much that you, and then to have what you have now, which is a New York Times bestselling author.
It was a miserable gathering of years. I'll tell you that. We were. I remember I was writing first draft of Gardens of the Moon. We were living on Salt Spring Island, beautiful island here just north of where we are right now. Starving in paradise. Neither of us had a job. We're on welfare. My wife was pregnant. And I wrote the first book in 4.5 months. I wrote Gardens of the Moon. And then we just basically packed everything up with a 1-year-old baby, jumped into a Volkswagen camper van and drove south. And we spent the winter in Bisbee, Arizona, and then went back up to Winnipeg where I got archaeology work. But when the archaeology work dried up, we were poor. We were really poor. Damn. Moving to England helped in some respects, but I was taking temp jobs all over the place, and it was hard going. It's hard going.
Yeah.
I do want to say part-time archaeologist, part-time freelance writer is the most millennial job description I've ever heard in my entire life.
I'm no millennial.
I know, but you really fit the bill in some ways.
Well, and not only that, I mean, I came to getting published rather later than most fantasy authors do. You know, when I go to conventions now, the new big names that are coming up, they're all, 20 years younger than me, easily, if not younger.
Yeah.
And it seems that sort of peak period I missed. And so I came at it somewhat later than many of the others. At least I got the books done. And that was the key for me. It took 11 years of writing, but I got the series done.
Damn right.
How does it feel, we're about 20 years out from Gardens of the Moon being published, right? So, I mean, I guess you wrote it 8 years before. But how does it feel to have that book, I don't want to put it too strongly, but in some way be so defining in the way people engage with your work or first probably come to the Malazan world, do you mean? Like, how does it feel to have that book that I'm sure when you wrote it, you were not like, this is going to be the entry, the envoy, the amuse-bouche, to it all?
Yeah. How does it feel? Well, I knew it was going to be divisive. I didn't think it was going to be as divisive as it was. One of the things that, as a reader, I didn't read just fantasy. I read everything. And I was a huge fan and remain a huge fan of science fiction. And so when I read Frank Herbert's Dune, I thought this is an awesome structure for a novel. You're dropped right in it, and you gotta tread water for quite some time before you start piecing the story together. So I thought, well, why don't I try that for fantasy? And so that's what I did, and that's what Gardens of the Moon. That structure, the structure of Gardens of the Moon is ripped off straight from Dune.
Well, I love Dune, so it's a surprise.
But the thing is, a lot of there's a big divide between fantasy readers and science fiction readers, and yes, there are plenty of readers who indulge in both genres as fans, but there are plenty of others who don't, and they'll read fantasy, they won't read science fiction. And so it never even occurred to me that the structure I was using was going to be divisive. It was going to.
Do you feel like there's a big gulf between the two, or do you think they're more similar than people think?
There's a huge gulf between the two. Yeah.
What do you think characterizes that difference?
Reader expectation. It's what they are coming to expect when they open up a fantasy book versus a science fiction book. Even use of language changes, and the expectation changes for that. Yeah, they're hugely different, but I mean, I adore them both. And again, like I said, it never occurred to me that was going to prove a problem. I'm simply dropping people into a story the way I did, and it did, obviously, and still does.
I lived with Peter while he was reading Gardens for the first time, and the second time, and then finally finished it on the third time. So I'm aware of how much division it can cause.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I watched him throw his copy of the book across the apartment one day.
I didn't throw the book. I
that.
want to correct the record.
I should warn you, there will be instances to come in these books where you're
literally in the last episode of Gardens, I am recorded throwing a book across the room because I was so mad at how good of a writer you are, screaming.
Yes,
well, you may be throwing it for other reasons.
I'm sure I will.
That's coming. Yeah, just warning you now.
There's a lot of diverse characters at the center of the book. Racially, sexually, all these things, but also, many loathsome and heroic characters. Lots of different types. I'm sure you're not surprised when people love Whiskey Jack or Coltane or Dujek or some of these people. Has there been any characters that you're surprised when they connect with readers? Like, do you meet a lot of Gaz fans out there?
No, I hope not. Because your two friends don't know who Gaz is, but
my Gaz joke's lost on them.
Yeah. Let's just say a fairly despicable character.
No,
I sometimes wait to see if sympathy arrives in characters you wouldn't think it would arrive with. I mean, you guys are being tested by Felicin at the moment. But there's a character named Calor that I'm actually massively sympathetic towards. Mind you, I have to be sympathetic towards all my characters, and so I gave Calor his moment in the 8th book where I could potentially sway some readers because everybody hates Calor for obvious reasons, which you'll come to. But no, I don't really think of. I know certain characters like Karsa Orlong, very divisive. as a character as well.
Yeah.
But there are reasons for that, for sure.
Yeah.
The way you guys are talking, I feel like the best is yet to come because I don't know any of these people.
I hope so.
I would say, even if not the best, the bulk, because there's 8 more India, and it's good.
At least.
Fair.
The bulk is yet to come. Yeah.
The bulk is yet to come.
Well, we're probably nearing the end here. Been great having you on the show, Steve.
It's been fun.
I know you're writing up The God Is Not Willing right now, but is there any other projects in the work? Any other things you're trying to get out there? Any hot gossip?
Spill the tea.
Well, I was going to recommend, actually, as a sidelight, you guys take on Willful Child, the 3 books. Because
Pizza,
especially India.
I
mean, are you guys Star Trek fans? Are you Star Trek fans?
Ooh.
Peter enjoys a good track.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know. I haven't delved into that yet. Okay. I don't know yet. Haven't tried it.
Did you like Galaxy Quest?
I don't know what that is either.
That's a film.
With Tim Allen?
It's like a comedy. It's like a kind of a satire.
Professor Snape is in it?
Like 2001-ish, maybe?
It's an awesome film. So see, if you like Galaxy Quest, watch it. And if you like it, then Willful Child might be a lot of fun for you guys to play with. Because you can do audiobooks on that easily. Completely different writing style. And it might be fun as well because we're just closing out a deal for a graphic novel version of Willful Child. So timing could be good.
Well,
I like this idea.
Keep that in mind, yeah.
This is something I'm into.
He is the most obnoxious. If you think of Captain Kirk,
I try not to.
On steroids, then yeah, you're looking at Captain Hadrian. Yeah.
Okay.
And
The God Is Not Willing. You think early 2020? Is that?
Yeah, I'm hoping to be done by the end of the year, this year, end of December. I think I'm about 3/4 of the way through, or maybe 2/3. But anyways, it's coming along nicely.
This is
awesome.
I'm so sorry that brought up a random question for me. I've never thought about the process of writing a book. I just thought of the book being done. Not sure where that disconnect was, but just really quickly, is it just something that you like? Do you have to make time for it, or do you just like wake up when you're like, oh, gotta go write?
Well, yeah, it has to be a profession. So I don't write at home. I write in bars, restaurants, even food courts.
You can check the acknowledgements usually.
Yeah. I need people around me. I need the human conditions surrounding me, engulfing me even, to be writing this stuff. And then for this series, I did 4 hours a day, usually about 6 days a week. And I never did a word count, which means I don't say I have to do 2,000 words a day or anything like that. I put the time in. And so some days, maybe I got 2 paragraphs done. Other days, I got 10 pages. And they're both fine, as long as I put the 4 hours in. And so it's just putting the time in. It's like anything you want to learn to do, right? If you play an instrument, you put the time in with your practice. And it's the same kind of thing.
Do you still practice?
Practice what?
Writing. I don't know. Like, do you ever just kind of like? I don't know.
No, I don't practice writing. I don't have time to practice writing. In a sense, one practices writing by reading other authors.
Fair.
Because you pick up things and you say, well, that was really well done. I'm going to steal that, and you steal it. And you can do that in terms of structure, in terms of word choice, sentence pattern, all kinds of things. It's, I guess, not much different from a guitarist picking up riffs and building off of a riff that they've heard.
To build on that, and maybe it'll take us out. We talked about Donaldson earlier, but maybe what are about maybe 2 or 3 books that you think like left a big mark on you, and that you think maybe more people ought to try and read, fantasy or in any other genre?
Glenn Cook's Black Company. The first trilogy. I actually consider my main inspirations Glenn Cook and Steve Donaldson, and I'm somewhere in between the two because Cook is a very, very terse writer, and there's a lot of humor in there, which I really appreciate, which we don't see enough of in epic fantasy. You will in this book or in this series, the Malazan series, but I would say Glenn Cook and Donaldson stuff were huge inspirations. John Gardner's Grendel, I think, was a big inspiration for me. Gustav Hasford's The Short Timers, which was turned into the film Full Metal Jacket, is a fabulous, amazing Vietnam War novel. Let's see what else. I liked a lot of Ursula Le Guin stuff. I read a lot of Andre Norton when I was growing up. Lee Brackett, I was a huge fan of her stuff. It's a fair list there, I think.
Yeah. Have you revisited them to return to what we
talked
about earlier?
I picked up a Masterworks collection of Lee Brackett's Mars stuff, and it is still very good. It's great writing.
Awesome.
It's great writing. She was highly underrated as an author.
Well, I think that'll about do it for us.
Alrighty.
Well, we can keep going. We didn't want to hold you too long. It's been great talking to you.
I think I'm okay for a bit. 10 minutes. That's fine. And then I got to eat supper.
Oh, wait. This leads me into a question. This leads me into my
Josh
question.
does have a dinner question.
I do have a dinner question. What is, okay, and it's a two-parter, okay, question, and the second one's not written, off the cuff. First,
I can't believe we're getting to this.
What's your favorite start-to-finish meal? And then second, what is that sleeper Canadian hit, that thing that you can only get in Canada that us Americans just don't know about?
You mean food-wise?
Yes, food-wise. Or if there's a Canadian thing that we don't know about that we should get on. Great.
Well, there's one thing that you can only get, actually, I think in Winnipeg, and it's a fish. It's called smoked goldeye. And it's phenomenal. Yeah.
Writing that one down.
Smoked goldeye.
I do. That look.
If you write down any, if you have any takeaway from this, it is the smoked goldeye.
Huh.
But in terms of meals, if I could get away with a small pill every day that would just transplant the necessity of cooking and eating, I probably would.
Wow.
So you're really Soylent is really your jam.
Yeah, it's just I'm notoriously lazy when it comes to cooking, especially when I'm on my own, like I am right now. My wife's in England. Dancing girls have gone home, so it's just me.
Yeah.
And I'll be cooking. I'll be cooking beef tenderloin steak and some frozen French fries.
There you go.
Why are you frowning, India? What's wrong with steak?
No. I just thought that was actually pretty impressive for someone to say they don't like cooking, but then you threw in the frozen fries, and I was like, oh. I was hoping maybe some whipped potatoes or something in there.
No, I've got a hockey game I want to watch, so something nice and quick.
Priorities.
Here was a question we didn't end up getting to.
Oh God, these are the B-sides.
Yeah, we're on the B-sides now. If you were one of the founding races, which would it be, and why is it the Kachin Chamale?
Kachin Chamal.
Oh, damn it.
Got him.
You fool.
Never gonna do it.
Which race? Probably Jagu. Yeah, they're the most fun.
It's a hot take. That is a hot take.
Well, I feel like you haven't met some of the more lively ones.
Yeah. Hey, I have a question. Are you super into tarot cards based upon how important the Deck of Dragons is?
The Deck of Dragons? No, but we wanted a vehicle like that, similar to the tarot cards. And it became an interesting way of bringing the Pantheon's own hierarchy and structure into the story. And of course, the nice thing with the divinations that occur is that it allows me to seriously foreshadow stuff, but in a really obscure way.
Yeah, Peter said if I go back and read Gardens of the Moon, the scene with Tattersall, he was like, you'll be just pissed that the whole story's right there. I haven't done it yet.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And then there's already been one Deck of Dragons in this, like the first one that happened in this second book. I stared at it. I mean, for like 10 straight minutes. I read every word, and I was like, this jerk has given it to me, and I'm too dumb to know what he's giving it. I was so mad.
Well, I have to entertain myself, don't I, when I'm writing this stuff, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
So when you set out, and to go back to talking about Audacity, how did you have the gall to turn in the second book and be like, okay, well, essentially there's none of the same characters, and we're not continuing the first story at all?
I had no choice, because actually the second book I started writing after Gardens of the Moon was Memories of Ice. And I had about 280 pages of that and lost it.
Wow.
What?
And so, I lost the entire thing. Yeah. And so I was so
tragic.
Yeah, pissed off and heartbroken about it. I did not want to start back on page 1. So I thought, okay, let me pick it up at what I thought was going to be the third novel. Yeah. Which was Dead House Gates. And as it turns out, structurally, that turned out to be far better to do Deadhouse Gates as the second book.
Yeah.
So also, it's a very compact novel. The storyline is quite discreet, and it has a very strong conclusion.
Yeah.
And so as a kind of almost standalone, here we go kind of thing, it made sense. And then with Memories of Ice, I was able to time-wise loop it back around. And so it became a very nice, compact little trilogy in and of itself.
Yeah.
First 3 books. Yeah.
We didn't see a lot of like large scale conflict in the first book, but we just the past week recorded we had read the scene at the river crossing with Coltane, which is a major battle.
The first river crossing, yeah.
Yes. Well, I've read a lot of books with like a really, really big conflicts, and like yours was like, it was really not hard to understand like what the characters were seeing, and what helped you with that? Like you obviously you've shown multiple times that you can write a 1-on-6 battle like you do several times, but this, how did you break it into a way that the reader felt comfortable understanding what was happening?
I don't know. Multiple points of view, on the ground kind of points of view as well. So I do touch on fog of war a fair bit in these battle sequences. But I was always a war gamer, and I certainly mapped out every battle that Coltane engages in the entire novel.
That's cool.
Yeah, fully mapped out. So then it was simply a case of putting, the various elements where they needed to be, and then moving them across the board, as it were.
To jump in on that, I think one of my favorite sequences in the books is not to. There's a certain battle in the 6th book in a city.
Yagatan.
Yeah. And I have read that you had that diagrammed as well. And to build on what Josh's saying, I'm so struck by that. I mean, that chapter is just, it's blown out of the water anyway. But
it's the one chapter where I wasn't going to let you go, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the longest chapter I've ever written. Yeah.
And it really feels that way. You're almost reading. You're like, I can't believe. You're just going deeper and deeper. It's so enthralling. And to build on that, even though maybe a disorientation's a part of it, there is a clarity, and I think Josh is touching on that, to these kind of larger things where maybe the reader could become more confused by it. But I actually feel like you do such a great job of kind of threading that needle. Good.
Well, I'm glad you think so. It'll be interesting to see what India thinks as well. I don't know if you've read a lot of battle sequences and battle scenes in books or not, but these ones are pretty enormous. So
the scales up there.
Well, okay. It depends on which scene, because most of they just don't get me, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Like some of them do, but then some of them I'm just like, whoa. Like I'm listening to it and then they're like, yeah, what's a good example? He threw what is the word that I like?
Lance.
Yeah. The lance, like, and chopped something, went through his eyeball, and but then others, I think they're pretty, like, there was one in the last book when, what was her name? Lorne? Adjunct Lorne?
Yes.
Yeah, Adjunct Lorne.
Her. She had a fight scene where she just kind of, like, went against, who was with Crocus? It was that one where she just kind of...
Oh, yeah, Crocus, Cruppa, Adult Man, and Murillo.
She just waits
Josh,
through
come
them.
on.
Yeah.
Krupp.
So yeah, she did, and in that I felt very empowered. So some of them I'm like, I really like it, but then others I'm like, whoa, this was more than needed. There was a lot of imagery there. Is that the word?
Yeah, and this novel is very much extremely graphic in terms of violence.
But I don't know, but this one is kind of I don't know if it's Felicin. I don't know if it's her, but I'm really feeling Deadhouse Gates. So I think it is her. Good. She's my girl. I think I wanted that. What I feel for her, I wanted to feel for Sorry, but we never got there. Her and I, and we still haven't.
Yeah. No, she's kept pretty remote. Yeah.
But now we might now, because she gets a little scrappy sometimes. So.
Yeah. Yeah, she's coming to herself through this book.
But is it her? But who is it herself? I don't.
Yeah. Well, she's got the echoes of Dancer still in her, or Cotillion, if you want to call them that. But yeah, she is emerging from that as well.
Yeah,
so.
I'm intrigued because sometimes you set me up for something big, and then it just doesn't happen. I'm like,
and that's part of undermining tropes. Okay, so think back to Gardens of the Moon, where towards the end of the book, Crocus falls in love with Chalice, this noble girl, and he's convinced that he can not only save the city but get back in time to the garden party to save her. Yeah. Well, and of course, in your classic sort of fantasy novel, he goes back there and he saves Chalice and they live happily ever after. Well, by the time he gets there, Chalice has already run off with some other guy who saved her, and a guy whom she subsequently marries, in fact. So that's where I'm setting up your expectations, and then I unplug them.
I love that, but I also hate that.
Crocus in the Garden is such a clown.
I know, isn't he?
He is.
Yeah.
Is that when he like kidnaps her, kind of, and it's just super weird?
He was just talking. Come on.
He makes a choice.
It was a choice.
Absolutely. Yep.
My last question I have is the maps at the beginning of these books.
Drive you crazy, don't they? Yeah.
It makes me so mad at every time we have these maps, because I was looking for the slave camp for 7 chapters, and it was literally a one-off sentence that goes, well, that city south on the island we're on, and I finally was like, I got the city. Oh, we're here? Why?
Well, a lot of that's not my choice. I provide massive amounts of maps, or I did for this series. And the publishers then decide, well, too many maps. So they cut down the numbers. And not only that, Skull Cup is extremely small, so the scale of the map would not have shown Skull Cup anyways. It's basically the main cities are the ones visible on that scale.
How many maps would you say you, like, for example, would hand in with a book like that?
I probably handed in a half dozen at least. But a lot of the maps are also ones that I didn't hand in, but I used, obviously. The battle sequences are all mapped out, or were all mapped out. And it would be a mistake to put the full chain of dogs in at the beginning of the book, the 2 maps for the chain of dogs. You guys don't know the chain of dogs yet, but that is Coltane's journey. That's what it is.
I was gonna say I had a feeling that's what it was called.
I bet you did have that feeling, Josh.
Whatever.
I didn't. We're just like, the dogs.
But that route is entirely mapped, and again, it then became a decision. Well, if you put it in to begin with, then you know how far they get, etc. And that would have been a mistake. So maps can occasionally be spoilers.
Yes.
Yeah. To maybe then go out on a final question about contrasting Gardens of the Moon and The God Is Not Willing. Talked a little about lessons you took away from Gardens of the Moon, but I'm also interested in, when a reader would pick up Gardens of the Moon for the first time, it's the first time they are learning about the entire setting. Whereas when they would pick up
God Is Not Willing?
Yeah, well, God Is Not Willing, or the Carcanis trilogy, they're bringing this extra knowledge with them, not only about the setting, but also the story. So I'm curious about how you are using that to inform it, as opposed to when you're first introducing it in Gardens of the Moon.
Well, first I have to think of most of my readers will have read the Malazan Book of the Fallen for The God Is Not Willing.
Yeah.
There may be new readers coming in, and I have to bear them in mind. So I have to still tell, fairly straightforward story. Yeah. But a lot of the Easter eggs are going to be primarily for the audience that is familiar with the Malazan. Sure. And the book takes place 10 years after the last book of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So things have changed. Yeah. And but then some things are the same. So that's going to be part of what's going to be, hopefully, entertaining for the veteran reader. The Malazan stuff.
I'm sure a lot of people are looking forward to it.
Well, I'm having a lot of fun right now. I'm actually writing a chapter with a bunch of Malazan Marines, and it's been great to revisit them because they're mostly insane. So good fun.
Yeah. Fun. Well, it's been a lot of fun having you on the show.
Yeah, it's been good.
Oh my goodness.
And I'll be keeping an eye out for your next podcast and follow you through as far as you guys are prepared to go. So
well, that's very kind.
Oh, it's been fun.
Yeah, hopefully we get a chance to talk again sometime.
Yeah, it would be cool to revisit this maybe in 2 books down the road or something along those lines. Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Cool. All right. Pleasure meeting you all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Same.
It's great to have a conversation.
Enjoy your beef tenderloin.
Yeah.
Oh, I will. Thanks.
And your hockey. Oh, this was such a joy. Thank you so much. I really...
well, thank you.
It's my favorite episode yet.
Thanks for writing the books too.
Yeah, that is
those
you're
old
welcome.
things, yeah.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yeah,
Have a
you
good
too.
one.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
India, I have to say I'm very impressed that you've stayed with it, because I listened through the podcasts all through Gardens of the Moon. And I thought, oh, you poor woman, you're actually getting this for the first time, having only read Hunger Games, was it? And then getting it as an audible or as an audio. And
Rookie
that
mistake.
is just
Rookie mistake.
So you've got the book now, have you?
I do. I have both books now.
Okay, good.
But I'm not gonna lie. I still also audio, but I have the book now.
That's okay.
Too.
Yeah, yeah. Because I cannot imagine doing the 10-book series from scratch as audio, because it was never written that way. It's written for multiple rereads, as long a shelf life as possible. And so if you're just hearing it, man, you're going to miss so much.
And especially because he's one person reading all these different characters, so every time, and then it was worse so starting the second book, because everything he uses similar voices, but for different people now, and I'm like, who are you? You're not who you were last book.
No. And the other thing is, none of them have ever contacted me on pronunciation.
Clearly,
I found that so surprising.
It is like all over the place. It's I can't even listen to them because of that. I can give you guys a pronunciation guide if you want.
That's what we need.
That would be incredible.
I'm just so surprised, because I feel like if you gave me a book to record, and then, you open it up and Amtos Phalanx there, my first thought is going to be like, well, how does the author say this word? Not like I'm just going to take Peter's spin on it, you know?
Yeah, I know. And the only time it was done was for Forge of Darkness, and that's a great reading of that book, and the Willful Child books. So, but not this.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, pronunciation guide. Shall I begin?
Let's do it. Pronunciation away.
Okay, Duiker.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wait, Duiker?
Yeah, but a very, very, very mild of that split with the I. So it's Duiker.
Duiker.
Otataro.
Oh my God.
I don't even know who that is.
Oh, no, it's the sword. It's the metal.
That's the island as well.
Okay.
You mean
Otataro?
I've been saying it so wrong.
Can you say it again?
Otataro.
I want to phonetically write this.
I'm already doing. I have a Google Doc going. It's all good. I started it.
Okay. Felicin.
Felicin.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Felicin. Yeah. And Bowden, Heboric, Culp. Let's see, who else are we talking about here? Kalam. Kalam. Yeah.
Oh. Goodness.
See anything else? Coltane. That's pretty easy.
Yeah.
You can throw some more out now. Here's the obvious one. Teist and D.
Teist.
What?
Yeah. Think of the word Teist as I wrote it. It's Tiste. Well, it's a long I, and that's why you have the E at the end of it. If you took the E off, it would be Tist. All right?
He's right.
Teist and D, Teistadur, and Teist Leosin.
Speaking of which, we had a real kerfuffle over how to say the Teist Eater, Warren. Could you give us that one?
Is it Curled Emerlon?
Yeah, I really couldn't sort out that last one.
Can you say the second part of that word again?
Emerlon. Emerlon. Yeah.
Wow.
Emulawn, phonetically.
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's
I can't make any promises, but we'll give it our best.
Duiker's way nicer in my brain to hear than Diker, which is how I'd been saying it. So
yeah, which is awful. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It's really just Yeah.
Yeah. And
Duiker.
the Holy Desert Rariku.
Yeah.
Rariku.
It's so funny thinking about how you say this. Shaik.
Yeah. What else? Iscarol Pust, Icarium, Mappo, those are pretty straightforward, I think.
I feel worse because I know it's Malazan is technically, but I'm always saying Malazan. I'm always
most
punching
people
her.
do. Most people do.
Yeah.
But it is Malazan. Yeah. All right. Apparently, you guys have questions.
We do.